The last time I stood and spoke with you, I was inviting you to serve and spend your good time as a member of a work group, right? Work group working on scenario planning. We had indicated that we would indeed move forward with that, and you signed up and volunteered, and we met, and we had quite an engaging series of work groups meeting here at that time. And the idea was we would work through the summer. We recognized at that time that working through the summer was going to be a challenge, was going to be uneven, was going to be different for each of the work groups. We recognized that, and we anticipated that there would be those concerns and that we would come together and be able to address different issues that different work groups encountered over the summer and still be able to move forward. So during the summer, you had the benefit of having Bob Husband and Ms. Puckett, who was able to provide considerable support to each of the work groups. And I want to give a special thanks, of course, to Bob, but also to Tiffany Puckett. She is quite a resource, and she is, I think, exemplar of the quality of graduate students we have the good fortune of having in our college. So thank you, Tiffany, and we really appreciate the work you've been doing for us. And as things go, you will be asked to do even more. So without further ado, I'd like to call Bob Husband up, and we'll begin our focus on scenario planning for now. Thank you again, and Bob, thank you very, very much for the work you've been doing with us.
Good morning. Is this coming through? This is just for that. Okay. So you can hear me? We're okay? Good? Okay. Yeah, so he can hear me. Okay. For those of you that don't know me, as Bill said, I'm Dr. Bob Husband. For those of you that think, I think I remember that guy, I'm still Dr. Bob Husband. I've been with the university for better than 30 years in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. I was a faculty member there, and I serve as a consultant and have had the opportunity to be engaged with the College of Education over a couple of years now. Last year, in fact, Bill, I have to tell you, last year when you gave me the introduction you did, it was such a warm introduction that I gave consideration to maybe taking Bill home with me and reintroducing me to my wife and children in hopes that they would be more impressed with me than they currently are. But I passed on that, yeah. Oh. But about a year ago, we started on a conversation around the concept of strategic thinking and strategic planning for the college. And there was a desire expressed that we would do it in a slightly more creative way than traditional strategic planning is done. And so we embarked on something we called scenario-based planning, both to be a little more engaging, but to also create an environment in which we had a fuller, more robust conversation around the forces that might affect us going forward. What evolved out of that initial conversation that many of you are involved in was a second conversation in late May in which we really focused on developing work groups around what we called 5 forces that we saw affecting the future. Economic forces, technology forces, political forces, social demographic forces, environmental forces. And we said, let's see if we can develop scenarios as we think out into the future around these particular forces that are going to impact our decisions in our college, and see if we can come up with some scenarios that are not the end-all, but the starting point for a more robust conversation as an entire college as we think about strategic planning. Now, where that's heading, and Susan, if we can go to that one slide, would be great. Because I think you need to know what happens next, because today we've asked each work group to share a bit of where they are at this moment in time, okay? And to explore with you questions, to get more input So essentially their role, what we're going to do is have each work group come up, share where they are. Sometimes it'll be a presentation and you'll see, well, that seems fairly well developed, or they've been a little farther along. Other work groups will say, here's where we are in the process. Here's what we're thinking about. But the real purpose of this particular time together is to get input from you all as to what you, as you're listening, I think, have you thought about this, or have you explored this? And to that end, Tiffany is going to be capturing comments during the conversation that the work groups will be able to use as they finalize their particular scenarios. But after this process, and we expect the final scenario probably to be requested and submitted in the month of October, where they're going to put the scenarios out to the college again, in department meetings, in different joint sessions, to have us as a collective whole continue to think about what would be the impact of these kinds of forces on us and these kinds of scenarios as we move forward. With the ultimate goal that in December, to have another all-wide, college-wide faculty meeting in which we really begin to get down to, so now let's really think about how do we plan based on that. So if you think, are we just going to continue to have these conversations forever that are more kind of abstract and scenario-based, or are they going to evolve into something? And the desire is for them to definitely evolve into a plan that's based on these observations. Is that right, Dee Mary? I've spoken correctly? Okay. So today what we want to do, and what we ask the work groups to do, is to have each work group step up, share a little bit about where they are in their thinking about the scenario, their scenario topic area, but then again to engage you. And I have to confess that it's clear this faculty is capable of animated engagement based on the previous icebreaker. And so I think the groups are looking forward to and anticipating that we can get a bit of an animated conversation going around their topics. Okay? Does that make sense at least? Okay, we're pretty good? Okay. Then I think what we'll start, if I'm correct in the order, because we have three groups that have some slides to help support where they're headed. The technology group is first. Okay, Liz, you're first. And we've asked each group to take about 20 minutes. And I'll be helping facilitate, and one of the things about facilitation is being a timekeeper and pushing groups so that each group has an opportunity. Now we have three groups that have material.
Right. So this is a great group of people to work with. Who's here? I see Lynn. Yeah. So these are great people, and they're going to help me out with this, right? Okay. So our charge was to focus on the technology context facing post-secondary education. And we thought this was a really important charge because education often is kind of behind the curve on technology. We tend to kind of take things off the shelf that's available, and we think that universities and research institutes have a strong role to play in the development of educational technology, so driving the agenda, not just taking what's already there. So we're really excited about this. So I think we had a little template, so we're supposed to describe a little bit about our approach. So we were fortunate in our group to have a lot of deep expertise in technology. So I know some of the groups spent time running out and getting resources, and we heard that and we went, oh my God. So we didn't do that. We talked. So but we had great resources in our group. So I think we're okay. So the questions that we kind of quickly zeroed in on were what is it that technology affords? What is it that technology enables us to do that we couldn't do without that? And what are the likely outcomes of that, of having those kinds of affordances? And then what are the sources of variation? What are the things that could change those outcomes? So one way to do scenario planning is kind of zero in on variations of and select make 2 by 2 matrices or something like that to look at different, kind of different possibilities that way. But we kind of quickly rejected that and went to more of a cone model for scenario planning, where we were kind of focusing in on what we thought the probable future was. We kind of quickly got there of thinking about what was really likely, and then looking at kind of ways in which that focus in the middle, if you look at that cone, could vary. So that was really our approach. Anybody want to chip in? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I could. Here's some. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, sure. I was going to give them out at the end, but that's fine. So these are just written drafts of the, and they're 2 pages. So, and they're not stapled. Apologies. So just, I didn't staple. So you just have to take, it's fine. Just take the top two and off the top and pass it on. Okay. So the way I'm going to organize this, and I want to make sure we have time to talk at the end, is that we're going to talk about the things that we took for granted. What are the things that we are pretty sure that's going to happen with the development of technology? What do we know? And then what are the ways in which that can vary? So I'm going to start off with assumptions. Okay, one thing we're assuming is that we don't know anything, is that there's a lot of uncertainty about the way technology can evolve. Technology is historically and culturally relative. So at one point, a pencil was a technology, right? Books are technologies. So technology, what is technology is going to change. And we have an idea about how things can go in the next 5, 10 years, but things can happen that will really surprise us. So one part of technology, we have to just be, we can assume there are going to be surprises. There are going to be things we can't anticipate. Another thing that we think we can take for granted is that the use and development of educational technology is going to inevitably be interdisciplinary, and in the sense that we are always going to have engineers and computer scientists involved in this process, and they don't have an interest, an agenda necessarily in education. They're not trained in learning sciences or education, and so you've got, we've got those beloved geeks who are going to be doing this stuff without knowing much about maybe learning. And so that's one thing. And then the other part of that is that technology, the development of technology is always going to be driven by market forces. So we always are going to want to buy the thing that's pretty and the bells and whistles and the flashing lights. And if we leave that unchecked, so that it's driven by engineering and computer science and market forces, then we have the potential to have a future of educational technology that's engaging and entertaining and is really fun, but is not pedagogically sound. So we could have empty calories. We could have pretty things. And we have some of that now. We have Lumosity. We all get those emails, right? We're going to improve our brain because we're going to do these little exercises on our computer and this has been demonstrated by neuroscientists, which is complete nonsense. But so we have a big role to play as educators. We have a big role to play in that. Okay, so then we made a set of assumptions about affordances. What is it that technology could afford? One thing that it affords now, and we think it will continue to afford, is augmented interaction between instructors and students and among students that's fluid, dynamic, and connected. That it just creates connectivity on an incredible scale. Technology can give us access to instruction, to virtual experiences that you wouldn't have access to ordinarily, and information. It also gives us access to tools and instrumentation in professional practice. So it's not just about, we could talk about we could talk about technology, using technology to learn, but there's also technology that's involved in professions and life skills, and part of education is learning to use that technology. So there's kind of a two-way street that's always going to be there. Another thing that we can assume is that technology affords the collection of data on an unprecedented scale. As Bill likes to say, it's the incidental recording of everything. Is that we just have an enormous amount of data about the learner, about the context of learning, and about the behaviors during learning. We think that technology will continue to be deeply embedded in everyday life, and we came up with the term wearable. That we, we've got Fitbits for health, and maybe we're talking about, educational Fitbits. The technology is likely to become more physical, so we're going to start moving more to touch screen over keyboards and mouse. Multimodal, so different, the sights, sounds, smells. And multi-local, so that it affords this virtual co-location, that we don't have to be in the same room. We can be virtually together. And those are all things that familiar with. We also assume that the systems in which technology is embedded and used have inertia. So in contrast to the fast-paced and unpredictable change in technology, institutions, and especially educational institutions, for some reason, are often kind of sluggish in upgrading or in accommodating things. So physical systems, curricular design, systems for administration and communication are often slow to move. And so one example we came up with was, students now have laptops in the classroom, but like by 3:30, the 3:30 class, their batteries are running low and there aren't enough plugs in the room. I mean, that's just a real simple little thing of just those kinds of physical resources. And to the extent that we are not ahead of the curve with institutions that we can in accommodating this change, we risk being implementing this cutting edge stuff in a kind of a non-optimal way. So that's all we assume. Does that make sense? That kind of, but then this can all play out in different ways. So we looked at some of the variation, the things that would that make this outcome move one way or the other. And one critical thing is the depth of involvement by education and learning sciences in the development of technology. So there is that tension between taking things off the shelf, which we'll always do. I mean, the engineers and the computer scientists are going to develop things, and we will take them off the shelf, but we can't just do that. We have to go to the engineers and computer scientists and have them design to specs. Is that we need something, we know that this is a learning principle that is this, and we need this technology to do that. And there's that, we need, and depending on how active we become in that, we could have a very different history. We could go to the empty calories of technology or something substantive and really wonderful. Another way in which things could vary is the extent to which educational systems just become nimble in identifying technological innovation and incorporating it into practice, of knowing what is the next thing. There are you can think of technology right now and of two sorts. It affords a rapid dissemination of knowledge, like the Khan Academy. Have you seen those little videos where you can learn about differential equations in 15 minutes? So it affords this ability to kind of go out and get lots of information. I mean, not just Khan Academy, but TED Talks and all the things that, the web. We have all this knowledge accessible. And on the other hand, it affords adaptive instructional design. And so on the one hand, when you have this wealth of information and data that everyone has access to, it means it puts a pressure on us as educators to train students in skills of discernment and self-regulation, of how to move through that, how to appreciate that. And on the other hand, that we can have we can use technology to finely tune instruction. So Reader Rabbit or whatever is the latest thing I use. That because that's what my son loved. He just went to college. He learned to read. We read to him too, but he loved Reader Rabbit, where it would scale up the skills as he developed. Okay. Another variable is the grain size of the data and how we use the data. So on the one hand, you can collect data during the learning process to tailor instruction on a moment-by-moment basis. So I think the term for that is data analytics. Whereas on the other hand, you can use data to characterize larger patterns of the learner or instructional patterns. So you can use instructional programs. So you can use data to kind of characterize systems. And those are really two different ways. And they could coexist, and they probably will, but that's something that could lean one way or the other, or find some balance. Another important set of variables is the extent to which barriers to access are effectively managed. So there are economic barriers, there are generational barriers, there are barriers in professional development. This is kind of part of the sluggish systems problem, is that how fast can we get up to speed to deal with how quickly technology is changing. I wish Barb were here. She had a class to teach, so she's coming late. This was her thing. She loves technology, but she's really worried that technology can become so romanticized that it usurps the value of authentic experience. So let's simulate a walk through the woods instead of just going out and walking through the woods. So there has to be some balance there, and so that's it. So that's as far as we've gotten, and we would really like to know what you think. What did we miss? What are the things do you foresee? What are the things we haven't taken into account? And so I'll just, while you're thinking, I'll just say that there's that text, and so if you want to send us some input on that too, that would be great.
Liz,
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
I'm curious about whether or not the group talked about what the potential for technology to disrupt inequality and opportunity to learn, and how that might look.
The potential to interrupt inequality.
Right, to interrupt the inequalities and opportunities to learn. What we have right now that really fuels the achievement gap are huge variations and disparities in opportunity to learn. And I'm just wondering if we're thinking forward, not just the idea of putting a laptop in every school,
Right.
but thinking about technology in a different sense and
Yeah.
how it can be used to really begin to narrow that gap in the quality of opportunity.
I think the way we put that in there, maybe we just need to be more explicit, is we talked about it in terms of barriers to access. And that's exactly right, is that on the one hand, technology well used and well designed can eliminate barriers, and it can afford access, it can eliminate inequalities. But to the extent that you have economic barriers that don't allow the laptop readily accessible and usability, if you don't have that, then you could create the other way. So it could go either way. And we have to be really mindful about exactly that question. So I think that's a really good, we need to elaborate on that point. I had one really quick slide. Does that?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I thought it was the barrier statement, probably, but I think
that's a better way to put it. I like the way you said that. Yes, that's a good.
I think we were focused on the idea of it being problematic as opposed to facilitating the removal of that gap. So we should move our discussions toward how can we use technology to deal with that, as opposed to identifying it as a barrier. Thank you.
But I am hearing the question, and Tiffany's getting these down for the group to think about.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Has the group considered, and is the group raising the question of how technology serves as a barrier, and whether a future scenario might say, technology, in fact, we're going to predict is going to widen the gap rather than shrink the gap. And so that's something we as a college may have to consider. That gap may end in 10 years being wider, and how do we address that? So that's the question I'm hearing you raise, Bill, right?
I was actually asking the other question. Will we learn enough about the smart use of technology to be able to think of ways in which we would do it differently to mitigate that growing gap? I mean, we already know about, all the way back from the arguments about different on-ramps, and some people didn't have an on-ramp to technology. We know a lot about the barriers. What we don't know a lot about is how can we use the technology smarter to provide experiences or insights that are more educative and in that sense more fair.
So I guess what I'm hearing too is that it's not just the issue of access, but so let's say it's utopia and we can put a laptop in the hands of every kid. What good is that if they don't have technical literacy, if they don't know what to do with it? So that it's also a question of scenario planning, around, and to piggyback on what Bob just said about, do we widen the gap? So by virtue of giving access, do we also have unintended outcomes whereby they don't have the tools to utilize the technology in hand? So technical literacy should be on it.
Maybe that comes back to interdisciplinarity too, because maybe we need human factors, for example, to deal with access. Yes. Yeah.
I wasn't about the extent to which your committee talked about hardware and/or software. And I think this might be really very relevant to this discourse because, first of all, there's what software do you have access to? And again, is that off the shelf or developed by folks who know something about learning? But also then, what is it used to teach and how is it used to teach? So if you just sort of do the, make a household budget kind of exercise, that doesn't really prepare students for the kinds of critical thinking that we'd like them to have in their own futures and keep doors open for them, as opposed to other more open-ended kinds of explorations and really capitalizing on those affordances of the technology. So I wonder if there are different issues about hardware and software. You can get very caught up in how cool or fun it would be to have oxygen sensors and place them around your neighborhood and start to understand, how trees play a role in your neighborhood. But if I think that we sometimes lose track of prerequisites for making sense out of that cool data. And do we have the reading literacy, the numerical literacy, graphical literacy to use those kinds of cool hardware to bootstrap, again, the kinds of communication skills, teamworking skills, critical thinking skills that we would really like students to be getting.
One or two more observations, and regretfully we have to move on so we can get as many opportunities as possible. So
well, I'm just going to talk because no one's giving me the mic. So,
Wait, hold on.
that got me the mic. Good, thank you. So I think these scenarios are terrific, and I don't really see much to be added to them. But they really focus on, I'm going to sort of say the micro dimension, the use of technology in instruction specifically. And it seems you don't think that that's true. Okay. Well, to the extent that the topic is about the role of this in post-secondary education, I think that there's a whole set of scenarios about what this means for the university going forward that I think grow out of these scenarios. And I think that there are a lot of questions about the sort of environment that we're going to be in as a college of education on this campus or in any university campus when what does it mean for the university when more students are getting their courses online? What does it mean for the finances of the university? What kind of physical environment is a university going to be? What are classrooms going to look like? What does it mean in terms of the model you described when the centers of gravity of innovation surround engineering, computer science, learning sciences? What does that mean structurally for the university? What does it mean structurally for colleges of education? What should the role of a college of education be in the university context that's really working to innovate and develop in this area? So I don't have any disagreements with what's here, but I think that's a whole other set of post-secondary questions that aren't here that I think are really important for our future as a college.
Let me just say, so I wonder if this is a good segue to the other presentations, because I think what you're talking about is these different scenarios, economic landscape, political landscape, that has to somehow dovetail. Is that fair?
I think there's probably a connection with a lot of those other scenarios as well, yeah.
And I think the observation I would want to make is I think there's also a desire for a December faculty meeting in which the very questions you put out in front of us need to be addressed. So we actually need to get down and say, what does this mean for us? How do we need to respond to this? What are the implications of this? So I appreciate you raising them, and hopefully we will see the evolution right to December where we're beginning to collectively go right after those specific questions. That's wonderful. Mary?
Because I think it was a wonderful presentation, so thank you all very much. That was really great. But part of the scenario planning is, and I think when they all come together, the bigger issues will be there, but the role of the College of Ed within the university I think is important. And you guys know that we are championing that learning design lab, but all the problems that you're talking about are there, because engineering, as you know now, has a designatorium, so they're taking it in another direction. So every time these issues that we say are important, there are priorities within a university around design and technology, and we default to the engineers and what they think they want. So I think you picked that very well. It will be a struggle, a political and economic struggle for colleges of education that understand that universities are learning entities, just like schools, and we know something about that, right? And how do we play a role? So I think this is a wonderful beginning, and each scenario needs to be thinking about us, plus the role of education as an agent of change. I think that's what you were getting at as a whole. So I think it was a wonderful presentation and a great lot of issues that came up. So I'm excited and delighted.
Thank you. I would like us to say thank you to the technology group. Thank you, good. Nicely done. I think the political group is next. Whoever's environmental. I'm sorry, environmental.
Definition of environment, okay? We met over the summer. Our group consisted of Eurydice Bauer, Nick Berbelis, Pradeep I don't know how you pronounce their last name, David, Adrian, and Janelle. We came up with a list of critical considerations during that meeting. And you can see the first one is how to define environment. There were so many definitions that we talked about. Some were very proximal. They consisted of the environment in which we work and the connections between faculty. There were some people who said, well, we can't be too proximal because we live in a world where the physical environment is becoming more and more of an issue. So we decided to look at the social environment and the physical environment. And those are still two big considerations, because I think we forgot to look at the personal environment of the learner in all this. So we have these kind of three environments that people look at: the physical, the social, and the psychological or the personal. And all kinds of things come out of the dynamic interaction between those environments. Sustainability is important, and I'd like to add that when you look at sustainability, we usually define that the way UNESCO does, as the creation of things that we need today, or the manufacture, or the considerations that we need today, without harming the environment for future generations. But we also talked around sustainability as a concept that has education at the root of it. The values, attitudes, skills, and other kinds of things that go into education set the stage for the equitable societies, living within your means, sustainable development, as well as the some other issues about what a sustainable world looks like, the resources and things like that. So that was one of the, healthy food and ecosystems. That's a big thing that education helps with. We also talked about changes in the university demographics as being part of the environmental issues. The global impact, what do we need to start thinking about in terms of educating our faculty and our students about what kinds of impacts do the things that we use every day, all the resources that we use, and the imbalance of resources in developed countries. I mean, we're playing that out now with the Ebola crisis. We have an imbalance of medical facilities in developed countries compared to developing countries. Also, we can bring it down to the level of the college and the university, where people of color are marginalized. That's another environmental factor, and we could also spread it out to the world. Again, we have resource availability, and you can think about that at several levels, from the resources that we have on campus and in our buildings, the air quality, the monitoring of complex systems. We have the agricultural component of our college, of our university. But we can also look at resources as in a global way. So we're going from a more proximal consideration to a more distal consideration. Resources like clean water are not, we take the clean water for granted. But this summer in one of the cities, they had to cut off the water supply and people had to use bottled water. Well, that's bringing it home in a major way, because some kind of parasite or some bacterium got into the water supply. Well, a lot of people live like that all over the world. So we have to be cognizant of the way we use resources and the ways that other people live within their environments. We have the College of Education's current physical and social structure. I think all of us were aware of all the things that were going on outside our windows with them trying to improve the college's current physical structure. But along with that, we have to think about the environment as a social structure, because in some ways, physical structures, there's an interaction between physical and social structures as well as personal structures. So this very room that we are in, with wonderful light and wonderful height and beautiful acoustics, is helping us to relax and to relate to each other in certain ways. And all learners around the world need that physical environment in order to have the same kind of opportunities to produce, to design, to make things. Okay, and then we go to the university's current physical and social structure. So again, we're going from the more proximal environment to the more distal environment. Another thing is awareness of environmental issues. Now, I think all of us are on some level aware of environmental issues, but the importance and the salience of that awareness varies all over the place. So some of us can be in our own little research areas, and we know that the world is out there. We know that the seasons, that the climate is changing, and we are experiencing some of those changes, but they don't really relate to our day-to-day existence in our minds. But some of us are aware of environmental issues in a broader sense. So we are thinking about the inequities in resources. We think about how we can sustain our ecosystems. We think about how we can sustain our physical resources all over the planet, and also the economic sustainability. I mean, I haven't even really talked about that. So we decided to look at physical and social environment, and then we took a stab at looking at the social and physical environment in terms of isolation and connectedness or interdependentness. And we kind of got stuck there. We did a little, we don't have any more slides. This is the only slide. We had some other slides, but our group is very vibrant, and there were various reactions to some of the other slides. We actually did a small scenario, but that was not something that everybody bought into. So our concerns are, you know, we're back to the beginning. How do we define environment? I mean, it seems like environment is like schools, because everybody went to school. Everybody thinks they know what to do about schools, okay? So politicians and all of the, you know, all these people know what to do about schools. They know how to, millionaires, billionaires, they know how to school. So we live in environments, so we think we know what to do with them, you know? I think all of us have ideas about what should be done. So we didn't come up with a particular framework of assumptions the way technology did, which is wonderful. I wish we could have done that. But we have to get some sense of where we're going to define environment. And I invite the members of our committee who are here to help us look at that more, and to invite all of you to help us to narrow down where we're going to be looking at environment. And I know that there are some people who feel very strongly that if we continue to ignore the global interconnectedness of environmental systems, ecological systems, we do that at our peril. We just can't think in that view. We can't just let the whole world, you know, go to pot while we're doing our research or teaching or service. So I think those are two tensions: the proximal or the distal, or in the thing in between.
So maybe an observation, I had a chance to be with this group. They showed in the scenario, to build a scenario on what we call a 2x2 matrix. And so they put extremes on two scales. One was social, one was physical, and then one was connectedness, and one was isolation. So the picture you might have of their process would be, do we begin to look at the idea where there's a social connectivity, that the future is social connectivity but physical isolation? Or would there be both? We could envision a future where there's both social isolation, people are more socially isolated, and they're also more physically isolated. So where they were working to at that moment in time was, if you were to look at those four quadrants, what would be one that we might begin to think about? But I think the question that Sandra was putting out to the group today is, as you think about environment, what are things you would include? Because this whole notion of definitional struggle, what are things you might suggest to the work group and say, have you thought about this? Do you think about this? Here's my issue of environment. Maybe it's the green building approach. When you think about environment, what do you think are some of the more important issues as we look to the future? And I think the committee's just looking for input on that, or the workforce, work group. Thoughts as you hear some of this conversation about environment. Bill?
I don't know that I think it, well, I know that I think it's not an either-or issue when I think about environment. I think about the teaching and learning environment that impacts what we do, and I don't think we can separate those. I think there's an inherent interconnectedness between the two. There's a really old Smithsonian book called The Fitness of Man's Environment, and it actually talks about the fit between the kinds of tasks we take on and the kinds of physical environments in which those can best occur, and the implications of those designs for how people interact and use those how people use each other and engage each other inside those spaces. And so I guess if I were advocating a way of thinking about it, I would advocate thinking about the interdependency of the physical and social environment.
Please.
I don't have to go to the gym today. Thank you. Thank you. When I saw that a group was taking on the environment, I became very excited because I thought it was really wonderful for a college of education to take on issues related to the physical environment. And I hope that my advocacy is for you to continue to do that. I think it is a crisis. I think we live at a moment where every person and every institution of goodwill and good meaning and resources needs to be thinking about the impact of our relationship to the earth and of our actions upon the earth. And I understand that it would take considerable research, I think, to become more sophisticated about those issues, and we're all busy. And yet I applaud you for venturing into that direction and encourage you to continue to venture in that direction, because I think every college on this campus, the university as a whole, needs to be thinking about what the connection is between what we do, our scholarship, our teaching, our engagement, and the impact that we have upon the earth and the future of the planet. Which is not to say that there aren't connections, of course, for issues of social equity, social relationship, and learning. But to the extent that you can be bold and set a direction for other colleges of education, to the extent that we can be bold and set a direction for other colleges of education across the country by paying attention to these issues, I would think we would be serving ourselves and the rest of the planet well.
So I'm hearing a support for the notion of staying focused on the physical environment is one of the issues you raise in the scenario, that the team makes sure it keeps that included and it tries to address that in its scenario.
And I would go beyond, sorry, that back. and I would go beyond thinking, I think that, yes, but I'm saying more than simply pay attention to the physical environment. I think the physical environment speaks to things like classroom design and landscape, and those are very important matters. As many of the people in this room know, my other hat is an architectural and landscape historian. So I care deeply about those matters, and I would like to see those incorporated. And in addition, I'm worried about issues, and I think many people are, worried about issues of sustainability, climate change, and which goes beyond just physical environment as we typically understand it, to issues of environmental health and sustainability.
William & Mary, College of William & Mary, the new one, is an excellent example of a green building. They actually have a, whatever that certificate is. LEEDs. So they actually are a LEEDs facility. And it captures all of that.
Go right ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to say that, just to add to what was presented, I think part of the struggle is going back and forth between the larger and the smaller, where we situate ourselves, where we start the discussion, and where we sustain it. And so in some ways, I think we're looking to the group for some directions along those lines. But some things that I think that's keeping us thinking about these issues is that whenever you're talking about environment, you're talking about a context that can either enhance or limit. So for us, so any environment has that potential. It will either do one or the other. So the question is, what do we wish to do as a college of education? And how does that fit within the questions that I heard related to technology even, in terms of what it is that we choose to change, and not necessarily chase. So if that's the case, I think we need to think about the structural elements then that are parts of that, and there are different layers to it. Part of it also, I think we've talked about the human structural element. So we talk about technology, we talk about all these different things, but how are we designed to really deal with any of that? There's a structural element to this that I think needs to be entertained. How do we create the environment so that the intersection between what we're saying about technology, the need to prepare teachers to deal with inequities that are only going to be getting worse, not better? I don't see any signs for that. And so how do we do all those things? So I think that's what we're grappling with all of this in terms of what are the different layers of structure that we need to address. And I would imagine that we have to go at all of them simultaneously, and there lies the difficulty.
Other input or contributions to this particular work group's activity? You kind of hear the struggle, and I would say if you're not on a work group, the kind of conversation that's going on right now is the kind of struggles that each work group has had is what are the layers, how do we approach this task, how global do we get, how specific do we get? Those have all been a part of the conversations as they've been ongoing. So a wonderful summary of that. Any other observations? I will move us along simply because I'm recognizing time. And to keep good faith with you, I'm going to try to end this promptly at 12:15, which means we're going to have to push a little bit.
Just to be fair,
Mary, go right ahead, please.
Just so I was very heartened to hear the conversation and the presentation when it linked to action. I mean, right now we're making decisions about undergraduate program and how we're structured to ensure that that becomes what we want to mean. So I think your point is there. At the campus level, the issue of its social environment has become so critical. I sit around the table with deans who kind of don't know how to address it. You know, we're a comprehensive, inclusive, land-grant university. Environment really matters, and something's continually happening across that needs addressing, and it has to do with organisation, it has to do with values. So I really admire the way you've put this together and how it points to action at the local level in terms of the choices we make and at the campus level. So that your presentation is also very heartening for us when we get to those bold decisions we have to make about how we're organised and where our resources go, and more importantly where our voice goes on campus, because you know we do have a voice and we do model behaviour. So I'm very pleased with what I've heard. Thank you very much. It was a difficult topic to address, and I think you've done a magnificent job. Thank you.
Let's say thank you to the environment work group. And am I correct in saying the political group is next?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Whoever's representing that group.
I think it's important to say that our group met once, briefly, and Lorenzo is on the group, and the rest of them are not here. They're off on other missions. So I think you have to take this as an initial brainstorming, not as something that is as refined as either of the other two presentations. So it's an initial brainstorming. Yes, these are the representatives, and the one time we did meet, it was a subgroup. It was about half the members of the group. So we just struggled to meet. Maybe that's one lesson. Hard to do this over the summer. So not lack of will, just lack of connection. We focused on this kind of question, but when I looked back at these notes, I think the question we really talked about that one time was a focus on the College of Education within the university. What are the political issues, or what are some of the priority issues that we are facing as a college in this university at this time? So there's lots of political issues outside the college and so forth, outside the university, but when I looked at the kind of issues we brainstormed, that was the focus. And of course, we're all experts because it's politics. So everybody's an expert in politics, and we did actually have probably some significant expertise. But the next slide shows kind of a not ordered, but kind of a list of issues that we discussed at that time. Thanks to Tiffany for keeping notes and for putting together the slideshow and everything else. So you can see this was in the late summer, so these were issues that were on our mind as political factors that are part of our current environment. Freedom of speech has become a particularly interesting one of late. I think that was there at the time. And one member volunteered to draft a scenario, and the issue that we picked up on, because we had perhaps had the most conversation about it, was the increasing isolation of the college. and generated a scenario with that mainly by one member with a few edits by others. And this is kind of a doomsday kind of scenario. And maybe all political forecasting is more doomsday than positive. But we will share the text of this, and I will just go ahead and read it. It's on 2 slides. The College of Education is experiencing the effects of increasing isolation. Notably, we face a convergence of factors that effectively isolate the college from one of its key constituent groups, undergraduate students. Among these are general declines in undergraduate enrollment, devaluation of teacher education programs, persistent concerns about cultural and racial discrimination on campus. We will continue to have an excellent and diverse faculty in the college, yet significant numbers of students, especially undergraduates from diverse backgrounds, are choosing to go elsewhere. With diminishing resources and increased isolation, the college faces the possibility of being dissolved, and its programs either absorbed by other colleges or terminated. It's unlikely that greater public subsidy for education will be forthcoming, and the market for educational opportunity will continue to become more competitive. Well, that was our conversation. That was our conversation. You know, politics is often what are the problems. I said, we met once, we had a little brainstorming, but these were the issues that were on our minds. And we actually talked a lot about increasing isolation and marginalization. And keep me sleepless. Yeah. And chances of some knight in shining armor in the form of great, many grants, we're successful in that. But just trying to capture the decreasing enrollments at the undergraduate level, certainly no rescues coming in the source of funding from other places, and just a reality that this might, certain trends could make this a reality. So. Now that you've given us the bad news story, you want to give us a good one? No, that's up to you. You know, I don't know if it's. Yeah, I don't. It's probably just people get together and start saying what's going wrong. I mean, I think that's the political issues are often negative, and that's kind of what happened in our group. And we just. I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. But this is, based on one brief meeting, about half the group, this is where we got. So.
And let me make an observation, because frankly, in scenario planning I've done, it's this very kind of scenario, which is very provocative, disturbing, that begins to make us think about, well, what are the alternatives? And what if this is the alternative? What if this is what we're facing 10 years from now? How do we begin to react now to address that? So I want to both come into the group to say, we just take this bold statement and say, here's where we land. When we have our conversation, we end here. Now, I think your 3 questions are wonderful. It would be great to get input, and you can speak to the scenario if you'd like, but the idea of what are your initial reactions, where would you like to see more focus? For example, some of us might think, it might be good to include the government of Illinois, given how they operate versus other state funding sources, et cetera. So this is a great opportunity, and the group put it out to you, so hopefully you'll be provoked and jump in. I've got it. I'll get a microphone, Liz.
Okay, so I share these concerns. I think especially the issue of undergraduate education is a problem for us. I remember when several hundred students went through commencement every year. We outsourced secondary to the other departments. The other programs are shrinking. There is the move toward larger, new kinds of undergraduate majors. I think that's essential for us. I think we need to be more engaged with campus conversations about general education. And having our courses serving as general education courses and what the definition of general education is. But I also think that there are opportunities, and some of them were represented in Liz's presentation this morning. This is a college, this is a university that is talking about a lot of issues that we have expertise in. How to improve teaching, how to incorporate technology, what should the mission of a university and a higher education be in the future? We need to be engaged in those campus conversations. And I think one of the ways in which I think our college has been isolated is that we haven't always been at the table at those campus conversations. And we haven't always represented the expertise that we have. I don't want to use myself as an example, but having been at many of those tables, there really is receptivity and interest in what we have to say. We have tremendous expertise here about diversity issues. And I think we need to be more aggressive in telling the campus, we have certain things that you need for the policy issues, for the reform issues, for the reorganization issues that you're going through. And I actually think the College of Ed can be indispensable to those conversations, but we have to be more proactive.
And by the way, at this moment in time, it probably would be more helpful not to react to the scenario and say, how do we fix it? And I think that's where we're headed. But help the work group figure out how do you make this scenario more full-blown so that as we talk about it, we have more options of how do we react to this. So at least I'm going to suggest that at this moment in time. That we try not to, if we buy this scenario and say, as much as it's disturbing, I buy it, and therefore I want to fix it. That's yet to come. Please, you know.
I won't be as eloquent as Nick, but I just wanted to applaud you for facing head-on the threats. And I guess I just wanted to urge your committee to look for sources of resilience in the political system. Sources of resilience.
And that's all, many of them are right here.
I'll add something. So the challenge was to think about what element of this, as awful as it may be, that where we could elaborate on things and see where it could potentially go wrong, okay? So one way of thinking about this is that we're all touting technology as being wonderful. But I also heard at the beginning of this meeting us talking about connections to Beckman and how we got grants in connection to other things. That's wonderful on the one hand, but speed that up. Maybe part of it is also so going down the other way, is that we're co-opted more into that side. So the value system isn't that you're connected to the College of Ed, but you're connected to Beckman, or you're connected to something else that's viewed more positively than the College of Ed. So if I take that element of it, obviously you can twist that so it hopefully doesn't go that way and Mary can sleep at night. But on the other hand, you could see how, I could see how that could be played out in a different kind of way too.
Yes.
Sorry, Agent.
I don't deserve to speak because I was once on the political work group. Had some other committee obligations and was trying to protect myself as an assistant professor. But I guess to add to the scenario and the isolation in terms of our low undergraduate student enrollment is to also maybe talk about how the changes in our teacher ed certification, all the policies, what's going on at Springfield, and how that is impacting us down the road, and how we're reacting to that, how we're operating within that, and if we're being critical about how we're operating within that and how that's impacting the diversity of our undergraduate student enrollment, also our graduate student preparation programs in terms of leadership. So I don't know, adding things to the scenario, looking at the dark side of politics, I think that Springfield, ISB, and how we're operating within that is an important conversation to add to the scenario.
So having come, thank you. Having come.
Again, she leaned over and she said, Catherine's going to kill me for moving here.
Having come from a college that was in much worse crisis, in a city that was in much worse crisis, in a state that was much worse about education, Philadelphia, yeah. But I think we have every reason to be optimistic and to think that we have the intellectual capital, the political capital, the social capital to take advantage of the situation that we're in.
you don't know how good you got it. You really don't.
Let me make an observation off your comment, and I want to make sure that I'm connected with what you're saying. One of the things that they might think about is building in some comparative analysis and say, this is how we feel. We're getting increasingly isolated as a college, but what we're aware of within the larger scope of the U.S., there are states and programs that are in much worse, more dire straits than where we are. So it's not, that's kind of what you're raising. Where you came from, much worse, we've got lots of opportunities here. And that's not addressed in this scenario. That doesn't get raised at all. Is that a fair statement? I mean, I know you were trying to make a plug for us, but what I'm suggesting is, would that be something that might be valuable included?
Well, I don't think it's about saying other places are worse. I think it's about saying, here are all the reasons why we're in a better position.
Okay. Okay.
So, for example, there's a big talented student pool that would love to come here. And we should make this very attractive to them. They should come here and be in these majors instead of going elsewhere and being in other majors. If you think about Temple University in the city of Philadelphia, A, there's not a talented pool. B, there's not reasons for them to come to Temple. It's a completely different situation.
Okay. Okay.
Now, it might take an endowment for some scholarships. It might take a different kind of advertising, a different kind of outreach. It might take some work, advocating against going into Teach for America and saying, really, why don't you come and get a post-bachelor's, master's degree here instead of doing TFN, because you could actually do so good if you did that. But the pool is there, and the reasons to come here are very strong. And I think that's about the strengths of the place. If you think about Philadelphia, the school district of Philadelphia has laid off everything but 15-year experienced teachers. And you all know that there's a lot of problems with those teachers who have been there for a long time. Nobody in their right mind would come to Philadelphia and get a bachelor's in teaching there, because there's not going to be a job there for another 10 years.
Okay. And actually, I would love to continue this conversation, but we have the potential of 2 more groups. Let me just try to identify. Is someone from the economic group, the last 2 groups said they weren't sure that they were prepared or wanted to present at this gathering. Now, one group has stepped up and said, we want to put in some of our ideas and get them out in front of the group to get feedback. Economics, do we want to have an opportunity now that we've heard this? Okay, so then what we'll do is let's thank the political group. We'll go to the Thank you. Wonderful job. Did you want to comment, Mary?
I want to say 2 things. I want to thank them for putting it on the agenda the way they did. It's important. But I've discovered in my 20 years as a dean almost that fear never motivates anybody in this room, right? And so I'm glad it's on the agenda, but I think the point made by Nick about this university, we have a lot of individuals here. Universities operate as silos. So every college is isolated. I hear the College of Engineering saying they're isolated from the humanities, and the humanities don't understand them. They say that all the time. Can you believe it? And they get cranky. But we need to reach out, and we can reach out, and we have a number of people reaching out, and I want more of you to be available. So that's one of the actions that might come up. The second thing is the outside world is devaluing, exactly as that group said, teacher education. And we have been iconic, can be iconic, and we need to see ourselves like that. Like a laboratory, a lighthouse college. And that is another way of seeing ourselves and differentiating ourselves. So we wouldn't have come to either of those things if you just had praise up there and said we were great. So we do need to be aware of those kinds of issues. So thank you to that group for their day and a half, and thank you for putting that on the agenda for us.
Thank you. Can we save your group for the very last, since you've only got a few things to wrap up? Social demographic?
Yeah, right here.
Yep. They won't be able to hear you. We need to hear. This is for the tape. This is for the taped audience. This.
So
We are a group of 5 with Rebecca Ginsburg, Linda Herrera, Hedda, Bain Kaplansky, Raymond Reynolds, and myself. We had the good fortune to meet
We're working a little harder at this end.
July.
You may need to stand
sure.
up.
Okay, I'll stand up.
Uh-huh.
You bet. And when we got together, we were also a little bit daunted by our task and how do we, pick and choose. And I think to start off as a slogan for a group, we came up with, someone said this is fun, someone else said this is doable, and then I decided to change that to fun doable. So in the spirit of optimism, our group is coming up with fun doable scenarios and so on. So we're just going to kind of skip to the factors that we were thinking about in terms of ours. And again, like environment, we were having a hard time sort of narrowing down our subtopics. So we're looking at how issues around race, class, gender, age, sexuality. Sorry?
Are these only sheets coming around? Is that where people
No,
they're looking to the slides? So
oh, I see. Yeah, we do not have slides to present, but we do have a scenario that we've pulled together that's a draft scenario. Is that good? Okay. So we're looking at, formerly incarcerated students. These are all factors that we foresee changing the student demographic or the social demographic context of our work. Type of learner, first and second generation students or non-traditional students, international students, immigration status, disability, graduate student versus undergraduate, certificate versus degree student. And so we're also open to suggestions. We're open to new group members joining us as well. Hedda, would you like to add anything to know? Okay. So we've got this scenario, and I think we don't have enough time to go through it, but if you get a chance to read it, the questions we're working with are, in light of these changes, these projections and so on, what does that mean for us in terms of scope and access? And a lot of the questions that we've raised here already in the group are sort of maybe overarching, an umbrella, overarching all of those. Where do we invest our resources? How do we consider the environment and all of this, and dollars and everything else? So we're a work in progress, and our group looks forward to building on what we've started.
The biggest thing for us is we're looking for new members. There are only 3 of us, so anyone who's interested, just let us know.
I'm not sure you can hear that, but what was being said was that because of transitions in that, this particular group is down to 3 members. And so even if at this moment in time, you feel like this is an important area that you're concerned about for the college, the social and demographic issues, the trajectory of that, they would love to have new members to that group. So you are all invited, or at least some of you are invited. I don't know if they'll make that selection or not. Given what you've heard, and I know it's a bit limited, are there reactions that you have? Are there things that you thought I would have heard if I would have been thinking about social demographic that I didn't hear that in that statement that you'd like to say, well, maybe the group could think about this. Maybe this is something that would cross my mind. Yes, go right ahead.
Well, one thing I'm thinking about when I think about demographics, I don't know if it's a doomsday because I don't think it is, but an image of our College of Eds across the country, but thinking about ours. So 20, 30 years down the line, we're thinking about we can't use terminology such as majority, minority anymore because those don't map onto those individuals. A scenario that says, who are the people teaching those kids? What do we know about those kids? How do we impact their education? So we can't change the shift in the demographics, but we can certainly respond to it. Scenario that would capture something along the lines of the fact that historically we have not served that population well, but yet it will become the majority 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line. And so what does this mean for us? It certainly has economic impact, right? It has, I mean, you can go down all the list. It will have a tremendous impact. So what exactly do we do in response to that? It's something beyond our control, but it will impact us in every way possible.
And I know this is not your terms exactly, but what I was hearing was that the idea of being able to get demographics that we project, what will the demographics look like 20 or 30 years, and that gap that's going to exist on the traditional, what we've historically served as demographics, and that gap, and how do we address that gap? That would be an issue. Please.
Another dimension of demographic change you might consider is the aging of our society, which kind of shifts the focus, or not shifts, but it increases the importance of lifelong learning as a target that should be considered.
Let me piggyback on that.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, it's tomorrow. Yeah, so by 2030, 20% of the population is going to be 65 and over. So, and it's teachers who are getting older, and we're all getting older. So we have to figure out how to. We can't train undergraduates to have jobs that are 40 or 50 or 60 years in the future. We're staying in the workforce longer, so it's really an imperative. I think by 2050, the number of people 65 and older are going to be greater than the number of people 15 and younger. It's like it's a real big flip. This is just just to amplify what Dan said, it's huge, and we have to get into the business of lifelong learning.
So what I'm hearing you say, those two statements, is we would expect, and that may be too strong a term, but we would expect the scenario coming out of this group to reflect something about the age demographic and how it's changing dramatically. And not that this group is expected to address it. Again, understand that the scenario building is not an attempt to address the issue as much as raise the issue and put it out there for all of us to look at. But I am hearing that hopefully that'll show up in the scenario, that this age demographic will be a pretty salient feature of the scenario. Wonderful. Okay.
Can I ask Dan to join that group?
Pardon me?
Can I ask Dan to join the group?
Is he over 65? What do I look like? Come on. I get it.
Both of the Jennifers have comments.
So,
right ahead.
two of the Jennifers. So instead of one-to-one laptops, we'll have one-to-one teachers. The people over 65 can be paired one-to-one with the students.
Well, I know we're not to think of solutions, but I would just encourage the group in thinking of scenarios to not compartmentalize social demographic kinds of issues, but think about how, okay, this is how, but it's not over here. It should be always in the middle of what we're doing. I don't know how to say that in another way, but I think that's, to me, something that's extremely important, that it becomes part of everything we do in an integrated, conscious, intentional way. It meaning ethical, respectful engagement with issues of difference.
Other observations?
In the spirit of positive thinking, I want to just come off of what Jennifer and others have said, but we live here and have lived here a long time. We forget that, and I come to this place from India via California, and we have such a wonderful gift here that is clean and plentiful water. And in the political science groups, they're predicting that the wars in the future are going to be about water. And so if we conserve and respect the resources we have, including the physical resources we have here, I just got an email saying in 2025, LA is going to be the densest city in the country, and it has no water of its own, so you can just imagine what that scenario is going to be. We're going to become very attractive. And anyone who's really thinking about this already finds college towns the best kept secret in the United States, these small college towns. And with us in the Midwest, with these resources, I think people are going to want to be here, because this is where life might be sustained for a bit.
Okay, so what I'm going to, again, try to summarize, make sure everybody's heard. You raised the issue of water, and I hear two things. One is that possibly an issue that might want to be raised in the environment scenario as well, but also in the demographics scenario that we might introduce the notion that we prove to be a particularly attractive location, demographically as a result of the environmental constraints that are going on around us globally and nationally. And so that might be something this group would want to think about working in. That's what I heard. And I certainly think the environment group might want to work in. Please.
I have one quick comment. I just think like we should also consider the impact of globalization. You know, while we're thinking about the local environment, also the global environment, how it's going to, or the global demographic changes and how that's going to impact us. Like in China, I think the same data I was thinking about, like I was reading something, in 2050, China will have 45% of people over 55. Wow. Because of the one-child policy.
Well, given my current age, that's making me feel much more comfortable. Okay, we're pushing time, and we do want to give our economic group an opportunity to make some observations and give you a chance to react a little bit to that. So, Lisa, if you would, please.
Okay.
Oh, and by the way, let's do say thank you.
So I apologize, this is brief. The issue that we ran into, I know, thank you, Nick. The issue that we ran into was at our first meeting, suddenly everyone was saying, okay, we don't have a sense of this, and we don't have a sense of this, and we need to get more data on this. We came up with a list of about 15 or 20 items that we wanted to get before we could have a better understanding of what we needed to address on the campus, in the college, state and national data. So we were trying to think about this much more broadly, and it became a little bit daunting, wouldn't you say? So that was one thing. Tiffany has been absolutely amazing about whenever we needed stuff, we get it, but the inbox is a little overwhelming. Then the only other thing is that we did, a small group of people did try to get together over the summer. Sorry. Thank you very much. And try to pull together some information. So we feel like we are trying to move, but it's slow. So.
And I would say I had an opportunity to sit once or twice, or once at least with the economic group, and the data collection has been pretty phenomenal. Bless you, finally got out. And so that and their group, I would say your group has taken the tact that we want to really go after the data. We want to get a data set that really kind of helps us make a scenario that really makes sense economically in terms of the data. Is that a right statement?
We were feeling like we didn't even have a sense of what the shifts were within campus and the college, and what do we need to emphasize in terms of economic data, what do we need to look at, and you know, even getting information about what happens in our college as far as students that are coming through and who's funding us, you know, how students are funding us and that kind of thing. Those are the data that we felt we
Sure.
had.
Okay. And in a sense, given very little to respond to, I think the best statement to make is that more to come. Clearly more to come in the economic area, okay? Well, amazingly, I think we did pretty well at getting very close to time. Mary, I don't know if you have any comments you'd like to make about the overall process and reaction, and we want to thank all the groups one more time.
You know, I'm sitting here looking at you, and what I see is people being attentive to these issues, and that just by their body language and how they're listening. So we were anxious about this exercise when we started, but I and CEC had faith in our faculty and the people who are in our college that they could tackle this very complex issue. I'm not surprised that economic and politics found it more complex, because they're the ones that there's more about. You know, they're the ones that people at the top think about more than anything, particularly the economics one. And at the level that we're operating in, we don't have good data. We don't have good information. We're not very good at knowing how the business runs and how the economy impacts on it, because it's political. It's political at the top end, it's historic, you know, it has, and so it's the hardest thing to grasp with. So I just want to urge those two groups to continue and to bring some others as well into your group, because I understand how difficult. It's easier to talk about things that are further away from you. I know that seems odd, things that are further away from you than things that are really closer at hand and where there's so much. But in each presentation I heard implications for policy, implications for practice, implications for our resources, implications for our marketing, implications for our hiring. I mean, across all of that, that's what I was hearing. And when all the scenarios come together, we will again come, all of you, and decide as far as we can decide within the constraints of what we are allowed to do, the degree to which we can determine our future. So I just want to thank you all, those who were listening intently, those who participated, and any of you are free to contribute to any of these groups, either information or ideas, and please feel free to do that. So thank you all very much, and thank you, Bob, for your husbanding of the process. And of course, Tiffany, is she still here? Yes.